The crowd fell silent as J.D. Vance approached the microphone. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes watching his every move. The large auditorium was packed to capacity, with people even standing along the walls. Camera lights flashed from the press section, momentarily blinding him. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. Just 5 years ago, nobody would have imagined this moment. JT had grown up in a small Rust Belt town where dreams often died young. His childhood home had leaky pipes and sometimes not enough food on the table. His grandma, who he called Mama, had raised him when his mom couldn't. Those tough early years taught him lessons no fancy school ever could. Yet somehow, against all odds, he'd climbed out of that world. First to the Marines, then to Ohio State, and finally to Yale Law School, where professors were shocked by his candid stories about growing up poor in Appalachia. When he wrote about his experiences in Hillbilly Elegy, the book caught fire. Suddenly, this kid from nowhere was explaining forgotten America to everyone who would listen. "We need to remember the people who feel left behind," J.D. continued in his speech, noticing heads nodding in the audience. His rise in politics had happened even faster than his literary fame. He'd won the Ohio Senate seat as a newcomer, shocking the political establishment. Washington insiders didn't quite know what to make of him. He didn't fit neatly into any political box, which made him fascinating to voters but dangerous to career politicians. In committee meetings, J.D. asked questions nobody else dared to. At press conferences, he spoke plainly about problems both parties preferred to ignore. He criticized big corporations one day and government overreach the next. His office received thank you letters from both union workers and small business owners, often for the same speech. "We need to move beyond the tired old political battles," he said, warming to his theme now. "People are struggling while Washington plays the same old games." The audience applauded, but not everyone was cheering. From a private box above the main floor, 3 people watched with cold calculation. The woman in the center whispered something to her colleagues. They nodded, and one made a note on his phone. They had spent months building their case against the young senator. Their plan was already in motion. J.D. didn't notice them. Instead, he saw the elderly veteran in the third row wiping away a tear, the young college student frantically taking notes, the factory worker who had taken off his shift to attend. These were his people, the ones who believed that someone finally understood their struggles. Little did he know that within 24 hours, his name would be splashed across every news channel in America. The carefully constructed trap was about to spring shut. Documents were being leaked, quotes taken out of context, old relationships reframed. By tomorrow, commentators would be calling for his resignation. But for now, in this moment, J.D. Vance stood tall, believing the hardest parts of his journey were behind him. He had no idea that his greatest challenge, and perhaps his finest hour, still lay ahead. J.D. Vance walked into the Senate hearing room, coffee in hand, nodding to familiar faces. The morning had started normally enough, a quick breakfast with his staff going over the day's schedule, a call home to check on his kids, and now this routine budget meeting. The room hummed with the usual pre-session chatter. Aides whispered to senators, journalists checked their recording equipment, and the public gallery filled with observers. He took his seat at the long wooden table, spreading out his notes. The chairman called the meeting to order, and for the first 40 minutes, everything proceeded as expected. Boring questions about spending allocations. Predictable answers from department heads. J.D. stifled a yawn, thinking about the policy lunch scheduled later. Then Senator Eleanor Winters requested the floor. "Mr. Chairman, I have a matter of urgent concern," she said, her voice cutting through the room's drowsy atmosphere. J.D. looked up from his notes. The silver-haired senator rarely spoke during budget hearings. "I have here a collection of emails written by Senator Vance," she continued, holding up a folder. "Emails that directly contradict positions he has taken publicly." The room fell silent. Journalists sat up straight, suddenly alert. J.D. felt his heart skip a beat. "Senator, is this appropriate for a budget hearing?" The chairman asked, but his objection lacked conviction. The scent of scandal was too tempting. "These communications bear directly on budget priorities, Mr. Chairman," Winters replied smoothly. Without waiting for further permission, she began reading. "The infrastructure bill is bloated and unnecessary," she quoted. That's what Senator Vance told his constituents. Yet in this email to industry lobbyists, dated just 3 days earlier, he writes, "I'm confident we can secure the funding your projects need." JD felt his face flush. The quote sounded vaguely familiar, but something was off. Before he could object, Winters continued. To veterans groups, he promised unwavering support. Yet to his donors, he suggested cutting VA benefits to reduce the deficit. Camera flashes erupted as photographers captured his reaction. JD reached for his water glass, finding it empty. He tried to speak, but Winters steamrolled forward, reading more excerpts. With each example, the gap between his public statements and these supposed private communications grew wider. "Point of order," JD finally managed, his voice sounding strained even to his own ears. "I'd like to see these alleged emails." "Copies are being distributed," Winters replied with a thin smile. An aide handed JD a stack of papers. His eyes raced across the pages, recognizing fragments of real messages mixed with sentences he'd never written. The dates were wrong. The contexts were distorted. But explaining that would sound like desperate denial. His phone buzzed continuously with texts from his team. "What's happening? CNN is live with this. Social media exploding." The chairman, sensing ratings gold, let the spectacle continue for another 20 minutes. By the time the session ended, the damage was done. JD pushed through a crowd of reporters shouting questions. "Are you going to resign? Did you write those emails? Were you playing both sides?" His communications director pulled him into a side room where his chief of staff waited, face grim. "It's bad," she said, showing him her tablet. #Vance exposed was trending nationwide. Cable news had split screens showing the hearing alongside his past speeches, highlighting apparent contradictions. Political allies were already distancing themselves with careful statements about waiting for all the facts. "They're fake," JD insisted, "or at least manipulated." "It doesn't matter right now," his chief of staff replied. "The story is running. We need to decide, do we fight this head-on tonight, or do we take time to figure out what's really happening?" JD stared at the wall, thinking. His grandfather's voice echoed in his head. "When you're in a hole, first stop digging." "I need 3 days," he said finally. "No interviews, no statements. Tell everyone I'm reviewing the material." His team exchanged worried glances. In the political world, 3 days of silence was an eternity. "They want me to panic," JD said quietly. "To rush out half-cocked. That's not going to happen." As they left through a back entrance, a staffer handed him a note. It was from Winters, handwritten on Senate stationery. "Politics is a blood sport, nothing personal." JD folded the note carefully and put it in his pocket. It felt very personal indeed. The rental car crunched over the gravel driveway as JD pulled up to his childhood home just after midnight. The small house in Middletown looked exactly as it always had, white paint peeling slightly, porch light flickering, screen door held by a single hinge. He bought the place years ago when his book took off, keeping it as a reminder of where he came from. He stepped inside, breathing in the familiar smell of old wood and his grandma's ancient potpourri that somehow still lingered. The floorboards creaked under his feet as he moved through the darkened rooms. For the first time in days, his phone wasn't ringing. He'd switched it off somewhere around the Ohio state line. JD dropped his bag on the kitchen table, the same scratched oak surface where he'd done homework as a kid. Back then, his biggest worry was finishing math problems before Mama called him for dinner. Now, half the country thought he was a fraud. Dawn came with a knock at the door. His wife stood there, eyes tired from the drive. "You could have told me you were coming here," she said, hugging him tightly. "I didn't know myself until I was halfway here," he admitted. She unpacked groceries while he made coffee in the old percolator. "The kids are with my parents," she told him. "They don't understand what's happening, just that people are saying mean things about their dad." JD nodded, his throat tight. "What's it like out there?" "Bad," she said simply. "Your office has received thousands of calls. Most people want you to resign. A few news vans are parked outside our house in D.C. Your party leadership isn't returning calls." He spread the printed emails across the table. "These aren't right," he said. "Look at this one. The date stamp says March 15th, but it references a committee vote from April 2nd. That's impossible." His wife pulled up a chair. "Show me everything." For hours, they worked through the documents. She read aloud while he checked against his actual sent emails on his laptop. The pattern became clear. Real messages had been spliced together with fabricated content, dates altered, recipients changed. By evening, 3 trusted staffers had joined them, bringing takeout and grim updates. Cable news was running constant coverage. Former allies were distancing themselves. Political opponents were calling for ethics investigations. "The weird thing is," said his digital director, picking at cold noodles, "nobody's asking the obvious question, where did these emails come from? Who had access to your accounts?" JD looked up sharply. "That's it. We need to check the metadata." His chief of staff made a call, and by midnight, a cybersecurity specialist arrived, looking rumpled and carrying too many energy drinks. The kitchen became command central, laptops open, papers everywhere. Nobody slept. On the second day, JD's old neighbor brought over a homemade casserole. "Don't know what you did or didn't do," the elderly man said, "but my wife figured you all weren't eating proper." The simple kindness nearly broke JD. He'd been so focused on Washington that he'd forgotten there was still a real world out here. By the third morning, they had it. The cybersecurity guy, bleary-eyed after 36 hours straight, pointed to his screen. "The metadata's been altered, but not well enough. These files were created using a specific software tool. And look at this IP address pattern. It's bouncing through servers, but there's a trail." "What does that mean in English?" JD asked. "It means someone professional did this, not just a political opponent. This is intelligence operation level stuff." JD's wife grabbed his hand under the table. "There's more," the specialist continued. "I've found similar patterns in document leaks targeting 3 other politicians in the last year from both parties. Whatever this is, you're not the only target." JD stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the small backyard where he'd played as a child. The political calculations ran through his mind. He could still resign, write this off as a misunderstanding, and retreat to private life. The safe move. Or he could fight back and expose something much bigger than himself. His phone buzzed with a text from the Senate Majority Leader. "Time's up. What's your move?" JD turned to his team. "Get me back to Washington. I know what we need to do." Sleep-deprived and running on nothing but coffee and determination, JD and his small team huddled in the back of an SUV speeding toward Washington, D.C. Rain pelted the windows as the cybersecurity expert, a guy named Pete with thick glasses and a rumpled shirt, scrolled through lines of code on his laptop. "Look here," Pete said, pointing at his screen. "The metadata shows these emails were modified using specialized software. Not something your average political operative would have access to." JD leaned closer. "And you're absolutely certain?" Pete nodded. "The timestamps are wrong, file signatures don't match up, and there's digital residue from the editing process. Whoever did this was good, but not perfect." The car hit a pothole, jostling everyone. JD's wife steadied Pete's laptop, while his chief of staff continued making calls on her phone, speaking in hushed tones. "There's more," Pete continued. "I traced some of the server bounces. Many routes lead through servers commonly used by a certain foreign intelligence service." JD's chief of staff hung up her call. "I just got off with Congressman Taylor. He had a similar smear campaign last year. Different issue, but the same pattern. Documents that looked real but weren't. And Taylor's from the opposite party," JD noted. "This isn't partisan." The pieces were falling into place. As they crossed into Maryland, Pete made another discovery. "I found something weird in the code signatures," he said. "The same digital fingerprint appears in leaks targeting 4 different politicians in the last 18 months. 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, all people who supported the same foreign policy bill." JD pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to process everything. "So this isn't just about me. It's about destabilizing our whole system." His wife squeezed his hand. "The question is, how do you prove it? Most people won't understand metadata and code signatures." The SUV pulled into a hotel parking garage, away from press eyes. JD's team had booked a conference room under a fake name. For the next 12 hours, they worked non-stop, building their case. They tracked down the other targeted politicians, comparing notes and evidence. They assembled a timeline showing when each attack happened and what legislation was being considered at that time. Around 3 a.m., an intelligence community contact called with unofficial confirmation. Off the record? This matches patterns we've seen before. Foreign actors using domestic political divisions to weaken our institutions. By dawn, they had assembled compelling evidence, side-by-side comparisons of the real emails and the doctored ones, technical analyses of the forgery methods, and testimonials from other victims of similar attacks. It's not just about clearing your name anymore, said JD's digital director, staring at the wall of evidence they'd created. This is about exposing a threat to our democracy. JD walked to the window, watching the early morning traffic building on the streets below. Regular people heading to work, unaware of foreign powers manipulating their political views. We need to go bigger than a press conference, he said finally. Bigger than interviews or social media. This deserves the biggest platform possible. His chief of staff looked up. What are you thinking? A joint session of Congress? The room fell silent. Joint sessions were rare, usually reserved for State of the Union addresses or speeches by foreign dignitaries. They'll never approve it, his communications director said. They will if we get support from both parties, JD replied. And we have evidence affecting members from both sides. His wife walked over to him. This is risky, if it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, I'll resign anyway, JD said. But at least I'll have tried to warn people about what's really happening. Pete looked up from his laptop. I found something else. The attack patterns show they're gearing up to target at least 3 more politicians next month. Whatever they're planning, it's escalating. JD nodded grimly. Then we don't have much time. Let's get to work. The next 48 hours were the most intense of JD Vance's life. Calling in every favor he'd earned during his short time in Washington, he worked the phones relentlessly. First came the leaders of his own party, who were skeptical but intrigued by the evidence. Then the opposition party heads, who initially suspected a trap but couldn't ignore the proof that their own members had been targeted too. You're asking for something that's only happened a handful of times outside of a State of the Union, said the Senate Majority Leader during a tense midnight meeting in his office. Because this is a threat that's only happened a handful of times in our history, JD replied, sliding over a folder of evidence. By the third day, momentum was building. The 4 other targeted politicians, 2 from each party, came forward privately, comparing notes and confirming the pattern. An influential committee chair who had initially called for JD's resignation now became his strongest ally after seeing the technical evidence. We need to set aside politics for a moment, the veteran lawmaker told reporters, carefully avoiding any specifics. Senator Vance has raised concerning national security issues that merit our full attention. The press went wild with speculation. What national security issue? Was this related to the email scandal or something else entirely? Cable news ran constant coverage, with so-called experts offering theories ranging from somewhat plausible to completely outlandish. On social media, #What'sVanceHiding competed with #VanceTruth for trending status. Outside JD's office, protesters from both sides gathered, some demanding his resignation, others holding signs supporting him. Through it all, JD kept his head down, working methodically with his team to prepare. They rehearsed his presentation countless times in a secure room, fine-tuning the technical explanations to make them accessible without dumbing them down. Remember, you're not just speaking to Congress, his wife reminded him. You're speaking to everyday Americans who don't know anything about metadata or server bounces. The night before the joint session, JD couldn't sleep. He paced the floor of his DC apartment, going over his notes again and again. What if they didn't believe him? What if this made things worse? The weight of what he was about to do pressed on him like a physical burden. His phone buzzed with a text from his old high school teacher back in Middletown. Whatever happens tomorrow, your hometown is proud of you for standing up. The simple message steadied him. This wasn't about saving his career anymore. It was about something much bigger. Dawn broke over the Capitol dome as JD arrived early, wanting to check the presentation equipment himself. The normally bustling hallways were eerily quiet, with heightened security in place. In the chamber, he watched as technicians set up the displays that would show his evidence. "Sound check, Senator?" asked a technician. JD stepped up to the podium, feeling the history of the moment. How many others had stood at this very spot, in moments of national crisis or celebration? He tapped the microphone. "Testing," he said, his voice echoing through the empty chamber. By noon, members of Congress began filing in. The mood was unusually somber, with none of the typical across-the-aisle chatter. Everyone knew something unprecedented was happening, though few understood exactly what. JD waited in a small room just off the main chamber, his core team gathered around him. His chief of staff straightened his tie. Pete, the cybersecurity expert, handed him an updated flash drive with the very latest evidence they'd uncovered overnight. "It's time, Senator," said the sergeant-at-arms, appearing at the door. JD took a deep breath and picked up the manila folder containing his notes, his only prop besides the digital presentation. He'd deliberately chosen the simple folder over the sleek leather portfolio his staff had offered. Today wasn't about looking polished. It was about looking real. "Good luck," whispered his communications director. JD nodded, squared his shoulders, and walked toward the chamber doors. Behind them, the entire Congress waited, along with millions of Americans watching on television. It was time to change the narrative. The chamber fell completely silent as JD approached the podium. Every seat was filled, with some members of Congress standing along the walls. The gallery above was packed with press and spectators. JD could feel hundreds of eyes watching his every move, waiting for him to show weakness. His heart pounded so loudly he wondered if the microphone might pick it up. He placed his manila folder on the podium, took a sip of water, and looked up at the sea of faces. Many were hostile, others curious, a few supportive. He spotted Senator Winters in the third row, her expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Speaker, Madam Vice President, members of Congress, my fellow Americans," JD began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "4 days ago, I was accused of saying one thing to the public and another in private. Today, I'm here to reveal a truth far more disturbing than political hypocrisy." He pressed a button, and the large screens on either side of the chamber lit up with 2 email versions side by side, the original and the doctored one. "What you're seeing is the actual email I sent last March, and beside it, the version presented at the Senate hearing. Note the changed date, the added paragraph, the altered recipients." JD moved through his presentation methodically, showing example after example. The initial murmurs in the chamber died down as the evidence mounted. He explained the technical details in simple terms, showing how metadata proved manipulation, how digital signatures revealed patterns of forgery. "But this isn't about me," JD continued, his voice growing stronger. "I'm just the latest target." The screens changed to show timeline graphics connecting similar attacks against other politicians over the past 18 months. Gasps rippled through the chamber as members recognized their colleagues' names and faces. Congressman Chen was targeted after sponsoring a bill on technology regulations. Senator Patel after her work on election security. Representative Wilson following his stance on foreign interference. Each attack used the same methods, carried the same digital fingerprints, and served the same purpose: to divide us, to make us distrust each other, and to weaken our democracy from within. JD's delivery grew more passionate as he linked the evidence to intelligence reports documenting similar tactics used against other democracies around the world. This isn't partisan politics gone too far. It's not overzealous opposition research. The evidence points to a coordinated foreign intelligence operation seeking to exploit our divisions and erode trust in our institutions. He displayed maps showing server locations, data trails crossing international borders, connections to known foreign intelligence fronts. The room had grown so quiet you could hear papers rustling as members flipped through the printed evidence packets on their desks. "Some of you are wondering why I'm making this public rather than handling it through classified channels," JD acknowledged. "The answer is simple. The American people need to know. Because the target isn't just politicians, it's the trust citizens place in their government. If that trust dies, so does our democracy." The screens changed to show Pete's latest discovery. A list of likely future targets, including members from both parties sitting in that very chamber. The tension was palpable as politicians spotted their own names. "This isn't about me keeping my seat," JD said, his voice softening. "This is about all of us keeping our democracy." He looked directly at Senator Winters. "Our political differences are real and important. We should debate them vigorously. But we must be able to tell the difference between genuine disagreement and manufactured division created by those who wish us harm. JD closed his folder and stepped back from the podium. I've provided detailed evidence packets to every office. Intelligence and cybersecurity experts are available for briefings. I ask only that we face this threat together as Americans first and members of political parties second. He took a breath, looking around the chamber one last time. Our enemies are betting that we're too divided to stand together. Let's prove them wrong. For several seconds, the chamber remained frozen in silence. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single person began to clap. Another joined, then another. Within moments, the entire Congress was on its feet. It wasn't just applause, it was acknowledgement of a truth that transcended politics. The standing ovation lasted for nearly 5 minutes. Even members of Congress who had been JD's fiercest critics rose to their feet. It wasn't just respect for his courage, it was recognition that something larger than partisan politics was at stake. As the applause finally died down, the Speaker announced the formation of a special bipartisan committee to investigate foreign interference. To everyone's surprise, Senator Winters herself seconded the motion. When JD stepped down from the podium, a path cleared for him through the crowded chamber. Hands reached out to pat his shoulder, shake his hand, or simply touch him as he passed. The mood had transformed from suspicion to solidarity in the span of 90 minutes. In the hallway outside, Senator Winters approached him directly. The cameras caught the moment, her extended hand, his brief hesitation, then that handshake. Neither spoke, but the image would appear on front pages across America the next day, captioned simply, "Country over Party." By evening, JD's phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages. The president called to thank him for his service to the nation. Foreign leaders sent statements of support and offers to share intelligence on similar operations targeting their countries. Cable news channels that had demanded his resignation just days earlier now praised his patriotism and courage. "I didn't expect this," JD told his wife as they watched the coverage from their kitchen. "I just wanted to clear my name." "You did more than that," she said. "You reminded people that some things matter more than winning the next election." The following week brought a whirlwind of activity. The Bipartisan Commission, with JD appointed as co-chair, began its work immediately. Intelligence agencies that had been tracking similar patterns privately now shared their findings openly. Tech companies pledged resources to combat disinformation. Cybersecurity experts from around the world offered assistance. In a particularly moving moment, a group of high school students from Middletown arrived at JD's office with a handmade banner, "Our hometown hero." They had followed the whole story and wanted to thank him for standing up for the truth. "You kids understand what's at stake better than most adults," JD told them, visibly moved. "This isn't about me or any politician. It's about making sure you inherit a democracy worth having." 1 month after his speech, JD returned to the small house in Middletown for a weekend of quiet reflection. Sitting on the porch swing, he read letters that had poured in from across the country, from retired veterans, young students, factory workers, farmers, and even former political opponents. Each expressed the same sentiment, gratitude for putting country first. His neighbor walked over with a fresh apple pie. "Saw you were back," the older man said. "Figured you might want something that tastes like home after all that fancy Washington food." JD laughed, suddenly realizing how much he had missed normal life during the past chaotic weeks. "Thanks. Want to stay for a slice?" They sat together as the sun set, talking about neighborhood news and local sports, not a word about politics or scandal or foreign interference. It was exactly what JD needed. 6 months later, the Commission released its first comprehensive report, documenting dozens of similar operations targeting democracies worldwide. New safeguards were implemented. International partnerships were formed. The public became more aware of how to identify manipulation tactics. At the 1-year anniversary of what the press now called the Vance revelation, a ceremony was held on the Capitol steps. Politicians from both parties stood side by side, a rare show of unity in an often divided Washington. JD was asked to say a few words. Looking out at the crowd, he kept his message simple. "A year ago, our enemies thought they could break us apart. They believed our differences were greater than what binds us together. They were wrong then, and they're still wrong today. As he stepped back from the microphone, JD caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd, Pete, the rumpled cybersecurity expert who had helped uncover the truth. The man gave him a supple thumbs up. JD smiled and nodded back. Some victories weren't about power or fame, but about protecting something precious, the truth that makes democracy possible.